My daughter looked me in the eye at the kitchen table, the same table where I helped her with homework for 12 years, and said, "Dad, I need you to not come to the wedding." I didn't say anything for a moment. I just looked at her. She had her mother's eyes, and right then she couldn't meet mine. "It's complicated," she said. "I'll explain later. I just need you to trust me on this." I nodded slowly. I said, "Okay." And she left. That was a Thursday in late September. The wedding was 6 weeks away. I want to tell you the whole story, because the part that came after, the part I found out later, that's the part that still keeps me up some nights. Not out of anger anymore. Just because of how fast it all unraveled, and how much of it I didn't see coming. My name doesn't matter much here. What matters is that I'm 63 years old. I live in a 2-bedroom house in Barrie, Ontario, about 90 minutes north of Toronto, and I raised my daughter on my own from the time she was 11. Her mother, my ex-wife, Paulette, moved out west when our daughter was in grade 6. Not a dramatic story. Just two people who ran out of things to say to each other. Paulette remarried eventually. We stay civil. We don't talk much. My daughter, I'll call her by her name, Celeste. She was the kind of kid who made everything feel worth it. She got into Delhaize on a partial scholarship. She called me every Sunday night all 4 years. She came home for Christmas and actually stayed the whole 2 weeks, not just the obligatory 3 days. When she moved to Vancouver after graduation, we did video calls every week. I flew out twice a year. I was proud of her. I still am. Even now, after everything, I'm still proud of her. That's the complicated part. She met her fiancé, I'll call him Gareth, about 3 years ago at a work event. He's a few years older than her, comes from a family out in West Vancouver. His father is some kind of commercial real estate developer. Old money, or close enough to it. Nice house, nice car. The kind of family where the wine at dinner costs more than my weekly groceries. I'm not saying that bitterly. It's just a fact. They lived in a different world than the one Celeste and I came from. The first time I met Gareth, he was perfectly polite. Firm handshake. He asked about my work. I spent 30 years as a facilities manager for a school board, and he listened, or seemed to. His parents were cordial at dinner. His mother, a woman named Iris who wore a silk blouse on a Tuesday afternoon, asked me thoughtful questions about Barrie, like it was a place she'd heard about in a travel magazine. It wasn't unkind, just a little careful. I noticed after that visit that Celeste started saying less about her weekends, less about dinners with Gareth's family. She'd always been open with me, the way kids who grow up with only one parent tend to be. So the silences were new. I didn't push. I figured she was just finding her footing in a new relationship, in a new world. I was wrong about that. Or rather, I was right about the wrong part. When she told me she and Gareth were engaged, I cried. First time I'd cried since her grandfather's funeral. And I wasn't even embarrassed about it. We were on a video call and she was laughing and holding up her hand to the camera, and I just completely lost it. She cried too. It was one of the better moments I can remember. The planning started almost immediately. The wedding was set for the following October, in a vineyard venue about 40 minutes outside Vancouver. Celeste told me early on that Gareth's family would be covering most of the costs. The venue, the catering, the florals. I offered to contribute what I could. She said not to worry. I offered again a few months later. She said the same thing. What I didn't know, what I wouldn't know until the night before the wedding, was what had been happening behind my back for most of that year. About 8 months before the wedding, Celeste had come to me with a favor. She needed a short-term loan, $22,000. She was embarrassed asking, she said. It was for some outstanding debt that had come up. A student line of credit she'd let compound longer than she should have, and a timing issue with a lease buyout on her car. She wanted to clear it quietly before the wedding, so she and Gareth could start fresh without that hanging over them. I had the money. Not easily. I'd been putting away a little every month since I started working, and I sold my truck when I retired early and drove a used Civic instead, but I had it. I transferred the full amount within 2 days of her asking. She cried on the phone. Said she'd pay me back within 18 months. I told her not to rush. I meant it. What I did not know was that there was no student line of credit. There was no lease buyout. Gareth's family had agreed to cover the wedding costs, but there were conditions attached, conditions Celeste had never told me about. His parents wanted a certain kind of wedding, a certain size, a certain venue, a certain guest list, and they had made it very clear, apparently over many dinners I wasn't part of, that the list needed to be curated. That word kept coming up later when I learned all of this. Curated. Gareth's mother had asked Celeste early on about her family. About me specifically, and Celeste. My daughter, my kid who I drove to swim practice at 6 in the morning for 4 years, had told her that I was retired and living quietly, that I was a simple man, that I probably wouldn't be comfortable at an event of this size. She hadn't exactly lied, but she had shaped the truth into something that served her. The money I transferred, my $22,000, went to cover the florals and the bar service, which Gareth's parents had refused to fund after some disagreement about the bar menu. Celeste had needed to make up the difference without anyone knowing where it came from. She used my money to pay for a wedding I wasn't invited to. That's the sentence I've had to sit with. I didn't know any of this the night she called me in September and said she needed me not to come, I thought. And I don't know why I gave her this much benefit of the doubt. I thought maybe there was something about Gareth's family, some tension I didn't know about, and she was trying to protect me from it. Or maybe she thought I'd be out of place and was trying to spare me the discomfort. I told myself a lot of things in those 6 weeks. My neighbor, a woman named Harriet, who's been on my street since before I moved in and who has strong opinions about most things, told me flat out that I was being foolish. "You raised that girl," she said. We were standing in my driveway, and she had her arms crossed, the way she does when she's made up her mind about something. "You don't get disinvited from your own child's wedding. That's not a thing that happens." I told her Celeste had her reasons. Harriet gave me a look that said she thought I was setting myself up for something I wouldn't recover from easily. She wasn't wrong. The week before the wedding, I sent Celeste a card with a small gift, a photo album I'd put together myself, printed at the drugstore, pictures of her growing up, her first birthday, her first day of school, the two of us at a Blue Jays game when she was 7. A photo someone took of us at her convocation where we're both laughing at something neither of us can remember now. I mailed it to her apartment. I didn't ask if she wanted it. "I just sent it," she texted me the day it arrived. Said it was beautiful. Said she loved me. Said she was sorry things were complicated right now. I said I understood. The wedding was on a Saturday. I spent that day doing very ordinary things. I went to the farmer's market in the morning. I bought some late-season tomatoes and a jar of honey from a man who keeps bees in Oromadante. I came home, made soup, watched a hockey game. I thought about her all day. I didn't cry. I just thought about her, what was happening at the vineyard that same Saturday. I learned over the following 48 hours through a series of phone calls I did not expect to receive. The first call came from a woman named Bridget, who was the wife of Gareth's older brother. I had met her exactly once, briefly, at a dinner in Vancouver the year before. She had my number because Celeste had given it to her at some point, apparently in case of emergency. This qualified. Bridget was careful on the phone, the way people are when they're telling you something difficult and aren't sure how much they're allowed to say. She told me the wedding had not gone well. There had been a problem with the florals. The arrangement had not arrived at all. Or rather, a partial arrangement had arrived, and it was not what had been ordered. The florist, when reached, said that an invoice had been outstanding for several months and that they had reduced the order accordingly. A table arrangement, not an arch, not the ceremony florals, not the reception centerpieces. Just a table arrangement. Gareth's father apparently had looked at the table arrangement in the venue's foyer and said something loud enough for several guests to hear. He used the word disgrace. He asked how this had happened. It came out fairly quickly, in the way these things do when people are stressed and not thinking about what they're revealing, that Celeste had told the florist the second payment was coming from a family account. The florist had contacted Gareth's family about the outstanding balance. Gareth's family had said they had never agreed to cover florals. The florist had reduced the order. The bar service was similarly complicated. The company that was supposed to provide full bar service sent 2 people with a very limited selection and said the remainder of the contract had not been paid. Garrett's mother stood at the bar looking at 2 bottles of Prosecco and a selection of beer and said, in front of the wedding party and several guests who were still arriving, that she did not understand what Celeste had done with the money. That sentence, what Celeste had done with the money, opened a conversation that nobody at that wedding was prepared to have on that day. Bridget told me the ceremony had still taken place. They got married. She said it quietly, like she wasn't sure if that was good news or not. The photos happened, the dinner happened, but the atmosphere was not what anyone had planned for. Garrett's father gave a speech that was, by multiple accounts, pointed. His mother cried, but not the right kind of crying. The second call came from Celeste herself, late that same night. It was close to midnight Vancouver time, which meant almost 3 in the morning for me. I was awake. I'd been awake. She was crying before she even spoke. Not delicate crying. The kind of crying that means something is actually broken. I need to tell you something, she said. I should have told you a long time ago. I sat up in bed. I turned on the lamp. I said, "Okay, tell me." She talked for almost an hour. About the pressure she had felt from Garrett's family since almost the beginning. About the way his mother had asked questions about me. About what I did, where I lived, what kind of family Celeste came from, and how Celeste had felt herself editing the answers, rounding the edges, making things sound more manageable. About how one edited answer had led to another and then another, until she had constructed a version of her history that was smaller and tidier than the truth. She told me about the money. She said she was sorry. She said it in the way people say it when they know sorry isn't close to the right word, but they don't have anything better. I listened. I didn't interrupt. I'd spent 30 years in facilities management, which means I spent 30 years fixing things that were broken without losing my temper in front of people, and I'd gotten reasonably good at sitting with difficult information before I responded to it. When she finished, I asked her one question. Did Gareth know? She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "He knew some of it." I let that sit there between us on the phone line. He knew I was embarrassed about our family, about where I came from. He didn't ask too many questions, because I don't think he wanted to know the answers. I said I needed a few days. She said she understood. She sounded like she wasn't sure I'd ever call back, and I didn't tell her she was wrong to be worried about that. I didn't sleep much that night. I lay there in the dark and tried to sort out what I actually felt, which is harder than it sounds when everything is coming at you at once. I was hurt. That was the simplest part. The kind of hurt that's physical, that sits in your chest. I had spent 30 years being her father. I had made her school lunches and coached her soccer team and stayed up until 2 in the morning to help her with a history project in grade 10 that neither of us actually finished correctly. I had not missed a single one of her piano recitals, even when they were held on weekday afternoons in the dead of winter, and I had to leave work early and drive 40 minutes each way. I had given her $22,000 that I had spent years saving when she asked without a single question, because she was my daughter. And she had used that money to pay for a wedding she hadn't invited me to. That part I kept coming back to. Not just the money, though the money mattered, and I want to be honest about that, but the specific shape of what she had done. She had used my resources to build a life she was ashamed to have me in. Harriet came by the next morning, before I'd even had coffee. She knocked. I opened the door. She looked at my face and said, "Tell me." I told her. She sat at my kitchen table for 2 hours. She didn't say, "I told you so." That's the kind of person Harriet is. She listened. She drank 2 cups of tea, and at the end she said, "What do you want to happen now?" I told her I didn't know yet. She said that was fair. I called my brother, who lives in Kingston, and who has always been the more practical one of the 2 of us. He's retired too, ex-military, not a man who wastes words. I told him the whole story. When I finished, he said, "Do you want my opinion?" I said yes. He said, "Get the money back first. Feelings second. Once the money is settled, then you figure out the rest." It wasn't warm advice. But it was clear, and I needed clear. I called Celeste back 3 days after her first call. I told her I needed the money returned. Not immediately, but in writing. A repayment agreement. A timeline, something real. I told her I loved her, and that I was not prepared to pretend that part of this hadn't happened. She agreed. She didn't argue, didn't deflect. She sounded like someone who had spent 3 days looking at what she'd done and didn't have a defense for it. We drafted a simple repayment agreement. She found a template online. I had my brother look at it, and she signed it and emailed it to me. 18 months, monthly payments, starting in November. Gareth called me a week after the wedding. I was surprised. He introduced himself formally, which struck me as strange given that we'd met 3 times, but I suppose he didn't know how else to start. He said he owed me an apology. He said he had known that Celeste was anxious about how her family background would be received by his parents, and that he had let her manage that without asking the questions he should have asked. He said he had not known about the money, specifically, until the wedding day. I don't know if I believe that entirely, but I'm not sure it matters as much as it might have a month ago. I thanked him for calling. I meant it, partially. His mother, Iris, did not call. I wasn't expecting her to. What I've been sitting with, in the months since, is the question of how we got here. Not just Celeste and me, but how she got to the place where she thought the answer was to disappear part of her own history. That part isn't about the money. That part is harder to look at. I think, if I'm being fair to her, and I'm trying to be, she had been slowly reshaping herself for that relationship for a long time. Not because Gareth demanded it, exactly, but because she had looked at his world and wanted to belong to it, and belonging felt easier if she could keep the 2 worlds from ever touching. I was the part that wouldn't fit. So she tried to make me small enough to carry quietly, out of sight. I don't say that lightly. She's my daughter. The thing that makes it hard isn't anger. It's the sadness of knowing that she felt she had to. A few weeks ago, she came home to Barry for the first time since Christmas. Just her, not Gareth. She said she needed to see me. She sat in the same chair she sat in as a kid, at the same kitchen table, and she looked smaller somehow, the way people do when they've been carrying something heavy for a long time and they finally set it down. We talked for a long time, about her childhood, about the things she remembered, about the things I hadn't known she was carrying. She told me she had spent years feeling like she had one foot in 2 different worlds and no solid ground in either one. She told me that she had loved me all the way through it, and that the loving and the shame had lived side by side inside her for years, without her knowing how to resolve them. She says she still didn't fully know how. I told her I understood that better than she might think. I told her that feeling out of place in rooms you didn't grow up in is something I know something about. That it doesn't have to mean what you came from is worth less. That she didn't have to choose. She cried again. I handed her a box of tissues, and she laughed. A little, because I always kept tissues on the kitchen table when she was a teenager, and apparently I still do. We're not all the way back. I want to be honest about that, too. There's work to do. She's made her first 2 monthly payments, right on schedule, and we talk on the phone every Sunday now like we used to. Gareth seems to be trying, from what she says. His parents are a longer road. I'm not sure I'll ever sit comfortably at that dinner table, and I've made my peace with that. What I know is this. I did not stand in a vineyard and watch my daughter get married. I spent that Saturday at a farmer's market and came home and ate soup and watched hockey. I didn't know, on that day, whether she would find her way back to me. But she did, slowly, imperfectly, in the way that real things tend to happen. And she came back to the kitchen table. That's the part I keep coming back to. The same table. 30 years later. She's still my kid. That's enough to keep going.